Step into a world of romance and mystery with Tamora Rose. Today we're talking about one of my favorite kinds of love stories. The ones where the greatest obstacle isn't an evil duke or an ancient curse or even a brooding vampire with questionable communication skills. No, today's villains are memories. The sort that arrive completely uninvited, usually at the least convenient moment imaginable. If you've ever wondered why romances about wounded hearts seem to stay with us long after we've closed the book, you're not alone. There's something wonderfully human about watching two people try to fall in love while carrying the emotional luggage of everything that's happened before. And unlike real vacations, no one can simply pay an airline fee and check that baggage at the door. Some romances begin with the immediate attraction and dazzling banter and enough chemistry to set the wallpaper on fire. Those stories can be delightful, but the romances that truly linger are often quieter at first. They're built on hesitation instead of certainty, on sideways glances instead of sweeping declarations. One character reaches out while the other instinctively steps back, not because they don't care, but because caring has been expensive before. That tiny hesitation can carry more emotional weight than a dozen dramatic kisses. As writers, those moments are irresistible because they remind us that falling in love isn't only about opening your heart. Sometimes it's about convincing yourself that opening it won't end in disaster. Again. One of my favorite ways to think about these stories is to imagine the past as an invisible third character. It sits at every dinner table, strolls through every ballroom, lurks in every haunted manor, and somehow manages to interrupt every perfectly romantic conversation. It never speaks aloud, but it's always whispering. Maybe it's reminding the heroine of a betrayal she never truly recovered from. Maybe it's reminding the hero of someone he couldn't save years ago. Whatever form it takes, the past isn't decoration. It's actively participating in the relationship, making every decision just a little more complicated. Frankly, if the past received royalties, it would be one of the busiest supporting characters in all of romantic fiction. Readers connect with these stories because almost everyone understands what it feels like to carry yesterday into today. You don't need to have survived an ancient curse or escaped a Gothic castle to recognize that old experiences shape new relationships. Someone who has been disappointed may hesitate to trust. Someone who has known loss may fear happiness because happiness feels temporary. These reactions aren't flaws in the character. They're believable consequences of living a life. When readers barely recognize these emotional patterns, the romance suddenly feels less like a fantasy and more like an exploration of something quietly universal. The costumes may be elegant and the castles magnificent and the supernatural creatures wonderfully dramatic, but the emotions remain wonderfully familiar. Now that doesn't mean every wounded character should spend the first 300 pages looking dramatically out those rain-covered windows. As entertaining as that visual may be, emotional depth comes from how the wound changes behavior, rather than simply creating sadness. A betrayed hero might become fiercely loyal to everyone except himself. A heroine abandoned in childhood may become astonishingly independent, while secretly longing for someone dependable. Those contradictions make characters memorable. They're not defined by a single painful event. They're shaped by how they've adapted to it. Real people are wonderfully complicated, and fictional lovers deserve that same complexity. Because endless brooding is exhausting. Eventually, someone has to eat dinner, rescue a horse, or accidentally fall into the fountain. Every romance built around emotional history eventually reaches a crossroads where the path refuses to remain politely in the background. Perhaps an old lover returns with inconvenient timing. Perhaps a carefully hidden family secret finally emerges. Perhaps the character simply reaches a point where pretending everything is fine becomes impossible. Whatever the catalyst, something forces yesterday to collide with today. I love these moments because they reveal who the characters really are. Grand romantic speeches are lovely, but difficult choices are even better. When love is tested by genuine fear rather than simple misunderstanding, every emotional victory feels earned instead of conveniently delivered by the plot. One thing I particularly appreciate is that meaningful healing rarely happens in a perfectly straight line. Fiction sometimes tempts us to imagine one heartfelt confession magically solves everything forever. Realistically, and frankly, more interestingly, that's seldom how emotional recovery works. Trust grows and retreats and grows again, and occasionally trips over its own shoelaces. Characters may have moments of remarkable courage, followed immediately by moments of ridiculous panic. That uneven rhythm makes them feel alive. Progress doesn't require perfection. Sometimes the bravest thing a character does isn't declaring eternal love beneath the moonlight. Sometimes it's answering the next letter, accepting the next invitation, or believing one more kind word than they managed yesterday. The romances I treasure most rarely rely on spectacular gestures alone. Instead, they build intimacy through consistency. A hand offered without expectation. Someone patiently waiting instead of demanding answers. A quiet conversation beside a fireplace rather than an elaborate declaration designed to impress absolutely everyone except the person who actually matters. Those gentle moments accumulate until trust becomes something solid enough to stand upon. I think that's one reason historical and paranormal romance pair so beautifully with romantic and emotional storytelling. Amid magical worlds or elegant drawing rooms, these deeply ordinary acts of kindness become extraordinary precisely because they ask for nothing except honesty. Eventually, there comes the moment every reader anticipates, with equal parts excitement and nervousness. The truth finally comes to light. The hidden wound receives a name. The carefully protected history is spoken aloud. Not for sympathy, but because genuine love eventually demands authenticity. It's one of the bravest moments any romantic character can experience. They're essentially saying, "Here's the part of me I'm convinced you'll reject." When the response is compassion rather than judgment, something remarkable happens. The romance stops being about rescue and becomes about acceptance. Nobody has rewritten history. Nobody has erased pain. But suddenly that pain no longer has to be carried alone, and that's an entirely different kind of victory. Perhaps that's why these stories remain so unforgettable. They don't promise that love magically erases every scar, or banishes every fear, or tidily wraps complicated emotions in a pretty ribbon before the final chapter. Instead, they offer something much more hopeful. They suggest that the past may always exist, but it doesn't always have to remain in control. The memories become part of the characters instead of their prison. Their scars become chapters rather than definitions. And somewhere between candlelight, whispered confessions, supernatural mysteries, and a hero who finally learns that emotional honesty is far more attractive than dramatic brooding, readers discover something equally comforting. That's it for today. I'd love to hear about a romance novel whose emotional journey has stayed with you long after you've finished reading it. Until we meet again, may your days be filled with passion and just a touch of magic.